What would you do if the person you love most destroyed you in front of the entire world? Maya Torres never imagined that question would define her life. But on a humid Miami night in 2018, standing in a ballroom filled with billionaires and champagne, she would learn exactly how cruel love could be. This is the story of how a single moment of betrayal became the spark that ignited an empire. And trust me, by the time this story ends, you'll understand that revenge isn't always about destruction. Sometimes it's about becoming everything they said you could never be. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's rewind to where it all began. Maya's story starts in a cramped one-bedroom apartment in Little Havana, where the AC barely worked and the walls were so thin she could hear her neighbor's TV through the plaster. At 28 years old, she was grinding harder than anyone I've ever known. Picture this. Days spent hunched over a laptop in her makeshift home office, designing logos and websites for small businesses that could barely afford to pay her. Nights spent in fluorescent-lit classrooms at Miami-Dade College, studying business fundamentals while other people her age were out living their lives. Her hands were always stained with either coffee or ink from the printer she bought secondhand off Craigslist. Maya wasn't chasing fame or fortune. She just wanted enough. Enough to travel someday. Enough to stop checking her bank account before buying groceries. Enough to prove to herself that the struggle meant something. She'd watch the sunset from her tiny balcony overlooking the highway and dream about a life where she didn't have to choose between paying rent and fixing her car. The irony? She was already rich in ways she didn't even recognize. She had authenticity, kindness, a work ethic that could move mountains. But in Miami, a city where Lamborghinis parked outside nightclubs like it was nothing, where penthouses towered over Biscayne Bay like glass monuments to excess, those qualities didn't buy you a seat at the table. Not yet, anyway. Everything changed on a Saturday evening in October. Maya had been invited to a charity gala by a client, some fundraiser for arts education she honestly couldn't afford to attend. She almost didn't go. Her best dress was 3 years old, bought on clearance from Nordstrom Rack. Her shoes were comfortable, not fashionable. But some whisper of fate or foolishness, told her to show up. The moment she walked into the Paris Art Museum, she knew she didn't belong. Crystal chandeliers, orchestra music, women dripping in diamonds that probably cost more than Maya's entire year of income. She felt like an imposter, clutching her small purse like a shield, wondering if anyone could tell her dress was on the clearance rack. And that's when she saw him. Alexander North stood at the center of the room, like gravity itself bent around him. 35 years old, founder of North Tech Industries, worth an estimated $2.8 billion according to Forbes. He was the kind of handsome that belonged on magazine covers. Sharp jawline, perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit, dark hair style with that effortless precision that probably required a team of professionals. But it was his eyes that caught Maya's attention. Intelligent, intense. The eyes of someone who had conquered everything he'd ever wanted. What Maya didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know in that moment, was that she'd just become his next conquest. Their eyes met across the room. He smiled. She looked away, heart hammering, convinced she'd imagined it. But then he was walking toward her, cutting through the crowd like Moses parting the Red Sea, and suddenly he was standing right there, extending his hand, introducing himself as if she didn't already know exactly who he was. "You look like the only person in this room who doesn't want to be here," he said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "That makes you the most interesting person I've met all night." It was a line. She knew it was a line. But God, the way he looked at her when he said it made her feel seen in a way she'd never experienced before. They talked for 2 hours. He asked about her design work, her business classes, her dreams. He listened, actually listened, leaning in like her words were the most fascinating thing he'd ever heard. When she mentioned she'd never been out of the country, his eyes lit up with something that looked almost like delight. "We should fix that," he said, and she laughed because obviously he was joking. He wasn't joking. 3 days later, Maya found herself on a private jet to the Bahamas. 3 days. She kept pinching herself, convinced she'd wake up back in her apartment with a broken AC. But it was real. The jet was real, with its cream leather seats and flight attendant who knew Alexander's coffee order by heart. The resort was real, an exclusive property where rooms started at $5,000 a night. The way Alexander held her hand as they walked along a private beach at sunset was real, and it made her head spin with possibility. Over the next 4 months, Maya's life transformed into something from a movie. Alexander swept her into his world with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no. Suddenly, she was attending red carpet premieres, her photo appearing in society pages with captions like "Tech Mogul's Mystery Woman." He bought her dresses, took her to Michelin-starred restaurants, introduced her to celebrities and politicians like it was nothing. Her friends were thrilled for her. Her mother cried happy tears on the phone. Even Maya started to believe in fairy tales again. But there were cracks in the fantasy, hairline fractures she chose to ignore, because acknowledging them meant questioning everything. Like the way Alexander would joke, always in private, always with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, about how lucky she was that he'd discovered her, how he'd rescued her from obscurity, how she'd gone from designing websites in Little Havana to wearing Valentino gowns on his arm. "My little Cinderella," he'd call her, and she'd laugh even though something about the nickname felt diminishing. Or the time they were at dinner with his business associates, and one of them asked about Maya's background. Before she could answer, Alexander jumped in with, "Oh, Maya's very humble, completely self-made. Isn't that refreshing?" The way he said it, like her middle-class upbringing was a charming quirk, something quaint and amusing. And then there were the gold digger jokes, always delivered with a wink, always followed by, "I'm just kidding, baby." But jokes have a way of revealing truth, don't they? They're like pressure release valves for thoughts people don't want to say out loud. "You're not with me for my money, right?" He'd tease while fastening a diamond bracelet around her wrist. "Because that would make you a gold digger, and we can't have that." She'd protest, hurt creeping into her voice. "Alex, you know I love you for who you are." I know," he'd say, kissing her forehead. "I'm just messing with you." But the seed was planted, and seeds, given enough time, grow into something darker. 6 months into their relationship, Alexander proposed, not with a quiet, intimate moment, but at a gala celebrating North Texas' latest acquisition, in front of 300 people, with photographers and champagne, and a ring that probably cost more than most people's houses. Maya said yes because she loved him, because she believed in him, because surely all those jokes and comments were just his odd sense of humor. The wedding was set for the following spring. Maya started planning, imagining their future together. She'd even begun to scale back her design work, convinced that maybe, just maybe, she could build something new as Alexander's wife. Maybe start a nonprofit, use his resources to actually help people. She should have seen it coming. Looking back, the signs were everywhere, bright red flags waving in the Miami breeze. The night it all came crashing down started like every other event they'd attended together. Alexander's newest skyscraper, North Tower, was having its grand opening, a 60-story monument to his success, all glass and steel and ambition, dominating the Miami skyline. The gala was pure excess. Ice sculptures, celebrity performances, a guest list that read like a who's who of American wealth. Maya wore emerald green that night. Alexander had insisted, said it brought out her eyes. She felt beautiful, standing beside him as he gave his speech about innovation and vision and the future he was building. That's when the reporter approached. Young, hungry, the kind of journalist looking for a story that would make their career. "Miss Torres," she called out, microphone extended, "there's been some talk about your background. Can you comment on the rumors that you're only with Mr. North for his money?" The ballroom went quiet. 300 conversations died mid-sentence. Maya felt the blood drain from her face. "That's ridiculous. Alexander and I." But Alexander stepped forward, and the look on his face was something Maya had never seen before. Cold, disgusted, like she was a stranger, like she was something dirty he'd accidentally touched. "You want to know the truth?" His voice carried across the silent ballroom. "You're absolutely right." Maya's world tilted. "Alex, what are you?" "I'm done pretending," he said, and there was venom in every word. Done playing along with the charade. Maya's nothing but a gold digger, a social climber who saw an opportunity and took it. And I was fool enough to fall for it. The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Phone cameras appeared like fireflies. "That's not true," Maya whispered, but her voice was lost in the chaos. "The engagement's off," Alexander announced, pulling the ring from her finger with a sharp tug that made her stumble. "I will not be taken advantage of. I will not let some nobody use me as a meal ticket." He said it, called her a nobody, in front of everyone who mattered in Miami. Maya stood there, frozen, humiliation washing over her in waves. Every eye in the room was on her, judging, believing, deciding she was exactly what Alexander said she was. She ran, pushed through the crowd, ignoring the cameras, the questions, the fake sympathetic looks. Her heels clicked against marble, then pavement, and then she was in a taxi, tears streaming down her face, her entire life shattered into pieces too small to ever put back together. That night, alone in her apartment that suddenly felt even smaller than before, Maya Torres made herself a promise. She didn't know how, didn't know when, but somehow, some way, she would prove Alexander North wrong. She would become someone. And one day, he would regret every word he'd said. But could Maya actually pull it off? Could a broken-hearted girl with nothing but a dream really rise from the ashes of public humiliation to build something extraordinary? Stay tuned, because what happens next will blow your mind. Her design work was good, but it was just her time, and time has limits. If she really wanted to build something, she needed to scale. She needed to build a company. The idea terrified her. It also excited her more than anything had in months. Within a week, Maya had registered an LLC, Torres Creative Agency. It sounded more impressive than it was. The agency was still just her, working from her apartment, but it was a start. She created a portfolio website that showcased her best work. She reached out to every business contact she'd ever made, swallowing her pride, asking for opportunities. Most ignored her. Some were actively cruel, mentioning the gala with thinly veiled judgment. But a few said yes, and those few became her foundation. 6 months in, Maya hired her first employee, a recent college grad named Sophie, who was brilliant with social media. Then came Marcus, a copywriter with a sharp wit and sharper instincts. The apartment was too small for meetings, so they'd work from coffee shops, parks, anywhere with Wi-Fi and enough space to think. They were scrappy, hungry, and most importantly, they believed in what they were building. Money was still tight. There were nights Maya would lie awake doing mental math, calculating whether she could make payroll and rent in the same month. The stress was crushing. But here's what she learned about pressure. It either breaks you or it forges you into something stronger. Maya was choosing strength. That's when she met Richard Chun. It happened at a small business networking event in Wynwood, the kind of gathering where people exchange business cards and make promises they'll never keep. Maya almost skipped it. She was exhausted. Her imposter syndrome was screaming, and part of her still felt like everyone in the room was judging her. But Carmen had literally driven to her apartment and refused to leave until Maya got in the car. Richard Chun was 72 years old, a retired venture capitalist who'd made his fortune in the 90s tech boom and now spent his time mentoring entrepreneurs. He had this way of looking at people, really seeing them, that made you want to either run away or tell him everything. He approached Maya during the cocktail hour. "You have the eyes of someone who's been through hell," he said, which was possibly the worst opening line she'd ever heard. Maya laughed despite herself. "Is that your investor pitch?" "No," Richard smiled. "That's my way of saying I recognize ambition when I see it. And pain. You got both. That's a dangerous combination." He paused, studying her. "Tell me about your company." She did. She told him about Torres Creative, about her small team, about her vision to help businesses tell authentic stories in a world drowning in fake perfection. She didn't mention Alexander or the gala, but somehow she suspected Richard already knew. When she finished, Richard handed her his card. "Call me Monday. I think we should talk about your growth strategy." That Monday meeting turned into weekly mentorship sessions. Richard didn't sugarcoat anything. He told Maya her business model needed work. Her pricing was too low. Her client acquisition strategy was basically non-existent. But he also saw something in her that she'd forgotten existed. Potential. "You're playing small," he told her during their third meeting. "You're so afraid of failing that you're guaranteeing mediocrity. Do you know what the difference is between entrepreneurs who make it and those who don't? The successful ones are willing to bet on themselves even when nobody else will." The words hit like a slap, because he was right. Maya had been so focused on survival that she'd forgotten about ambition. Richard introduced her to investors, real investors with actual capital, who were intrigued by her story. Not the tabloid version, but the real one, a woman building something from nothing. He taught her how to pitch, how to negotiate, how to spot opportunities most people missed. Under his guidance, Torres Creative started landing bigger clients: a boutique hotel chain, a sustainable fashion brand, a tech startup that needed complete brand overhaul. The agency grew. Maya rented actual office space in Brick Hill, hired 6 more employees, brought in a CFO to handle the finances that made her head spin. Revenue climbed month after month. They hit 6 figures, then 7. The woman who'd been called a gold digger was building actual gold and felt better than any revenge fantasy ever could. But just as things started feeling stable, life decided to test her again. It started with an email from her biggest client, a national retail chain that accounted for 30% of her revenue. "We're going in a different direction." It read, "Corporate speak for you're fired." No explanation, no warning, just gone. Maya immediately called her CMO, but the number went straight to voicemail. Then she discovered why. Alexander's company, North Tech, had just acquired a major stake in that retail chain. And one of their first moves was cutting ties with Torres Creative. Was it personal? Maya had no way to prove it, but the timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Losing that client put Torres Creative in immediate danger. Payroll was due in 2 weeks, and the numbers weren't adding up. Maya called an emergency team meeting, and the look on her employees' faces, these people who bet their careers on her, nearly broke her heart. "We're not giving up," she told them, projecting confidence she didn't feel. "We're going to pivot. We're going to find new clients. We're going to survive this." But privately, alone in her office after everyone left, Maya let herself feel the terror. What if Alexander was right? What if she was destined to fail? What if this whole thing had been a delusional fantasy? She called Richard, voice shaking. "I don't know if I can do this." There was a long pause. Then Richard said something she'd never forget. "Maya, you've already survived the worst day of your life. Everything else is just details." He was talking about the gala. And he was right. Maya spent the next 72 hours in what she later called her war mode. She reached out to every contact in her network, pitched like her life depended on it, because financially it did, and refused to accept no as an answer. She offered discounts, bundled deals, anything to get clients in the door. Sophie and Marcus worked around the clock alongside her, fueled by loyalty and pizza and stubborn determination. On day 4, they landed a new client, a sustainable tech company looking to rebrand. The contract was huge, bigger than anything Torres Creative had handled before. Then came another, and another. By the end of the month, they'd not only replaced the lost revenue, they'd exceeded it. The company had survived its first crisis. Barely, but survival counts. Around the same time, something unexpected happened. Maya met Daniel Rodriguez. It wasn't dramatic. No sparks, no love at first sight nonsense. He was an architect hired to redesign the building where her office was located, and they kept running into each other in the lobby. He'd make small talk about the Miami heat or the traffic on I-95, and Maya would respond politely while checking her phone, her mind always on the next deadline. But Daniel was persistent in the gentlest way. He'd ask about her work, and actually listen to the answer. He noticed when she looked stressed and would bring her coffee, not as a romantic gesture, but as a kind one. There was no agenda with Daniel, no performance, just genuine human decency. One evening, they ended up leaving the building at the same time. It was pouring rain, typical Miami afternoon storm, and neither had an umbrella. They stood under the awning, watching water sheet from the sky, and Daniel said, "Want to wait out over dinner? There's a great Venezuelan place around the corner." Maya almost said no. Her default was to say no to anything that wasn't work. But something about the way he asked, casual, no pressure, like her answer genuinely didn't matter to his self-worth, made her say yes instead. Dinner lasted 3 hours. They talked about everything except business. Books, music, their families, the absurdity of Miami drivers. Daniel was funny without trying too hard. He was successful, but didn't need to broadcast it. And when Maya mentioned, carefully testing the waters, that she'd had a rough year, he didn't pry, just nodded and said, "Well, you seem pretty remarkable now. So whatever happened, I'd say you handled it well." That was it. No judgment. No curiosity about her scandal. Just acceptance. They started seeing each other regularly. Coffee dates before work. Late-night phone calls when Maya was stressed about a pitch. Weekend trips to the Keys where they kayak through mangroves and forget about the rest of the world. Daniel never pushed her more than Maya was ready to give, and that patience, that respect, slowly healed wounds she didn't even know were still bleeding. "He's good for you," Carmen observed one day. "You smile more now." Maya realized she did. For the first time since the gala, she was allowing herself to be happy. Not just professionally successful, but genuinely, personally happy. But happiness, Maya was learning, has a way of making you vulnerable again, and vulnerability opens doors to pain. While Maya was building her company and rebuilding her heart, her business was expanding in ways she couldn't predict it. Torres Creative started diversifying into adjacent markets. Brand consulting, digital marketing, even some tech development. Richard encouraged the expansion, introducing Maya to partners and investors who saw her vision. One of those expansions led to a fascinating opportunity. A struggling marketing firm in downtown Miami was looking for a buyer. The company had good bones but terrible management, and they were desperate to sell. The price was steep, more money than Maya had ever considered spending, but Richard ran the numbers and smiled. "This could double your revenue in a year," he said. "Maybe triple it." Maya took the leap. Torres Creative acquired the firm, absorbed their clients, and suddenly she was managing 40 employees across 2 offices. It was terrifying and exhilarating and exhausting all at once. But here's what Maya didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know. That struggling marketing firm, it had one major client, a client who was currently renegotiating their contract, a client who was about to sign the biggest deal in the firm's history. That client was Alexander North's primary competitor. The pieces were moving into position. The stage was being set. And Maya Torres, the woman Alexander had called a nobody, was about to become the one person who could decide his fate. 2 years after the gala, Torres Creative was valued at $12 million. Maya owned a penthouse in Brickell with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Biscayne Bay. She employed 63 people. She'd been featured in Forbes, Entrepreneur magazine, and Miami New Times as one of the city's rising business stars. And she'd done it all without Alexander's money, without his name, without anything except her own talent, determination, and refusal to stay broken. The girl who'd once designed logos in a cramped apartment was now the woman who owned a company that rivaled, and in some cases, exceeded, the influence of Miami's established players. But the universe wasn't done with her story yet, because across town in a corner office that had once symbolized untouchable power, Alexander North was about to discover that empires built on arrogance eventually crumble. And when they do, sometimes the people you destroyed are the only ones who can save you. The question is, when Alexander came crawling back, and what would Maya do? Would she become the vengeful villain he'd created, or would she prove she was something far more dangerous? A woman who'd outgrown the need for revenge entirely? Because what happens next will redefine everything you think you know about power, forgiveness, and what it really means to win. So here's the question that will decide everything. When the man who destroyed you needs you to survive, do you give him what he deserves, or do you give him what you become? Maya Torres was about to find out. And trust me, her answer would surprise everyone, including herself. It started with a phone call on a Wednesday morning in October, exactly 7 years after that catastrophic gala. Maya was in her corner office on the 23rd floor of her building. reviewing quarterly projections that showed Torres Creative was on track to hit $20 million in revenue by year's end. The Miami skyline stretched before her, like a kingdom she conquered inch by bloody inch. Her assistant buzzed in with an unusual request. "There's a Benjamin Walsh on line, too. Says he represents Alexander North and needs to speak with you urgently." Maya's hand froze over a coffee cup. She hadn't heard Alexander's name spoken aloud in her presence for years. It existed only in that locked chamber of her memory where painful things lived quietly. "Tell him I'm unavailable," Maya said, her voice steady even as her heart rate wasn't. But Benjamin Walsh was persistent. He called back, sent emails, finally showed up in her lobby with the kind of desperation that security couldn't quite justify removing. Maya watched him on the security camera feed. This expensive lawyer in a rumpled suit, and something in his body language told her this wasn't a power play. This was surrender. She told security to send him up. Benjamin Walsh looked like he hadn't slept in days. He sat across from Maya's glass desk, a desk that had cost more than her first car, and the irony of the moment wasn't lost on either of them. 7 years ago, she'd been the one sitting in rooms like this feeling small. Now she was the one with the power, and they both knew it. "Miss Torres," Benjamin began, and even his voice sounded exhausted. "I'm here on behalf of Alexander North to discuss a potential business arrangement." Maya leaned back in her chair, the picture of casual authority. "I wasn't aware, Mr. North, and I had any business to discuss." "That's just it," Benjamin said, and now she could hear the desperation clearly. "Mr. North's company is in significant financial distress. North Tech is facing bankruptcy unless we can secure funding and office space for a crucial contract with the Department of Defense. The contract is worth $800 million, but we need infrastructure in place within 60 days, or we lose it entirely." He paused, gathering courage. "We've discovered that Torres Creative owns the property we need. The entire building at 1200 Brickell Avenue." Maya's expression didn't change, but internally, she was reeling. That building had been part of the acquisition package when she bought out the marketing firm 2 years ago. She'd barely paid attention to it. It was just one of several properties in the deal. But apparently, it was the one piece of real estate Alexander North needed to save his crumbling empire. The universe had a sense of humor, after all. "Let me get this straight," Maya said slowly. "Alexander needs something from me. Specifically, he needs me to lease him property that I own. Property that, if I refuse, will result in his company's collapse." Benjamin nodded miserably. "That's correct. And he sent you here instead of coming himself because he was afraid you'd refuse to see him," Benjamin admitted. "Given the history." History. Such a polite word for public humiliation and emotional devastation. Maya stood, walked to her window, looked out at the city that had witnessed both her destruction and her resurrection. Down below, people moved like ants, each one living their own story, fighting their own battles. 7 years ago, she would have given anything to be invisible. Now she owned the skyline. "Tell Mr. North," Maya said carefully, "that if he wants to discuss business with me, he can request a meeting himself. Like an adult, I'll consider his proposal, but I won't negotiate through intermediaries." Benjamin looked like he might cry with relief. "Thank you, Miss Torres. Thank you." After he left, Maya sat in her office for a long time, processing. Daniel called, confirmed dinner plans, and just hearing his voice, steady, warm, completely untainted by her past, helped center her. She told him about the meeting, about Alexander's situation, and Daniel listened without judgment before asking the question that mattered. "What do you want to do?" That was the thing about Daniel. He never told her what she should do. He trusted her to know her own mind. "I don't know yet," Maya admitted. "Part of me wants to watch him burn. Part of me wants to be bigger than that. And part of me is just tired of him taking up any space in my head at all." "Then maybe," Daniel said gently, "this is your chance to evict him permanently." The meeting request came the next day. Alexander wanted to meet at his office, which Maya immediately declined. They settled on neutral ground. A private room at a restaurant in Coral Gables, mid-afternoon when the place would be nearly empty. Maya arrived 15 minutes late on purpose, wearing a white Armani suit that cost more than Alexander used to spend on their weekend getaways. She wanted him to see exactly what she'd become, not out of spite, or maybe a little out of spite, but because she needed him to understand that she'd outgrown the version of herself he'd destroyed. Alexander North looked like a different man. Still handsome, but the arrogance had been sanded down by failure. His suit was expensive, but not new. His watch was nice, but not the Patek Philippe he used to wear. The 7 years hadn't been kind to him, and it showed in the lines around his eyes, the slight stoop to his shoulders. He stood when she entered. "Maya, thank you for coming." She didn't offer her hand, didn't smile, just sat down across from him and waited. The silence stretched. Finally, Alexander cleared his throat. "I suppose I should start with an apology." "You suppose?" Maya's voice was ice. "No, you're right. I owe you an apology. A real one." He met her eyes, and she saw something there she'd never seen before. "Shame. What I did to you at that gala was unforgivable. I was cruel and cowardly, and I destroyed something real, because I was too insecure to believe you could actually love me for who I was instead of what I had. I've spent 7 years regretting that night. Maya, 7 years watching you build something extraordinary, while he gestured vaguely at himself, while I tore down everything I'd built on arrogance alone." Maya listened without interrupting. She'd imagined this moment 1,000 times in the early days. What she'd say, how she'd make him hurt the way he'd hurt her. But now that it was happening, she felt only a strange emptiness, like watching a movie she'd already seen. "What happened to North Tech?" she asked, genuinely curious despite herself. Alexander laughed bitterly. "I happened to it, after we ended. I threw myself into expansion, trying to prove something to nobody in particular. Made reckless acquisitions, trusted the wrong partners, ignored warning signs because I thought I was too smart to fail. The tech sector shifted. I didn't adapt fast enough, and suddenly investors were pulling out. Then came the lawsuits, the investigations, the board losing confidence." He paused. "I built an empire on ego, Maya. Turns out that's not a stable foundation." "No," Maya said quietly. "It's not. Your company, though." Alexander's smile was genuine now, tinged with wonder. "Torres Creative is the talk of the industry. You did it the right way. Built something real, treated people well, earned every inch of success. I've been following your rise, and I have to tell you, I'm proud of you. I know I have no right to be, but I am." The word should have felt good. Vindication, validation, proof that she'd won. But instead, Maya just felt tired. "What do you need from me, Alexander?" He laid out the situation. The Defense Department contract. The need for the 1,200 Brickell property. The 60-day deadline. His company couldn't afford market rate for the lease. But if Maya would agree to reasonable terms, the contract would save North Tech and 400 jobs. "I'm not asking for charity," Alexander said. "I'm willing to pay fair value. I need a chance to rebuild, the way you did." And there it was, the moment of truth, the fork in the road where Maya could choose who she wanted to be. She could refuse. Watch Alexander's company crumble. Get the revenge that she'd fantasized about in those dark months after the gala. It would be justified, deserved even. Nobody would blame her. Or she could do something else entirely. Maya was quiet for a long time, thinking about the journey that had brought her to this room. The nights she'd cried herself to sleep. The mornings she'd force herself out of bed to keep building. Richard's mentorship. Carmen's friendship. Daniel's love. Every single person who believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. They'd taught her something Alexander never understood. Power isn't about dominating others. It's about becoming so secure in yourself that you don't need to prove anything to anyone. "I'll lease you the building," Maya said finally. Alexander's face flooded with relief. "Thank you. I'm not finished." Maya's voice was firm. "I'll lease it to you at 15% below market rate for the first year. After that, we renegotiate based on fair market value. But I have conditions." "Anything." "First, you create a fund for your employees." I want guarantees that if North Tech fails anyway, those 400 people have severance packages and job placement assistance. I won't help you save your company just so you can throw people away when it's convenient. Alexander nodded quickly. Done. What else? Second, you donate 10% of whatever profit you make from the defense contract to organizations that support women entrepreneurs, especially women from modest backgrounds who are trying to build something. Of course. Absolutely. And third, Maya leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. You never, ever contact me again unless it's strictly business. We're not friends, Alexander. We're not even friendly. This is a transaction. You pay rent. I provide property. And that's the extent of our relationship. Clear. Crystal clear, Alexander said quietly. For what it's worth, Maya. It's worth exactly what I'm charging you for the lease, Maya interrupted. Nothing more, nothing less. She stood to leave, and Alexander stood too, awkward and uncertain. I really am sorry, he said. I know that doesn't change anything, but I need you to know. Maya paused at the door. Look back at this man who'd once held the power to destroy her, and now couldn't even afford his own office space. She thought about saying something cutting, something that would hurt the way he'd hurt her. But then she remembered what Daniel had said. This was her chance to evict Alexander from her head permanently. 7 years ago, Maya said, you called me a gold digger in front of everyone who mattered. You said I was nothing, a nobody. You were wrong, Alexander. I was never nothing. I just hadn't found my something yet. So thank you, actually. Thank you for breaking my heart so completely that I had to rebuild it stronger. Thank you for humiliating me so thoroughly that I stopped caring what people like you thought. And thank you for teaching me that the only approval I ever needed was my own. She smiled then, not cruelly, just honestly. I'm not helping you to be kind or to get revenge. I'm helping you because I can. Because I've built something bigger than grudges and hurt feelings. Because 400 people deserve to keep their jobs regardless of how much their CEO deserves to fail. But mostly, I'm helping you so I can close this chapter forever and never think about you again. Maya walked out of that restaurant and felt 7 years of weight lift from her shoulders. She called Daniel from her car, told him how it went. And he said exactly what she needed to hear. I'm proud of you. That evening, Maya stood on her penthouse balcony with Daniel beside her, watching the sun set over Miami. The city glittered beneath them, all possibility and promise. And she thought about the girl she used to be, the one who'd fled a ballroom in tears, convinced her life was over. If she could talk to that girl now, Maya would tell her, it gets better, not easier, better. You'll work harder than you ever imagined. You'll cry more than you think is possible. But you'll also become someone you're actually proud to be. And that's worth every single painful moment. What are you thinking about? Daniel asked, pulling her close. Just how strange life is, Maya said. 7 years ago, I thought Alexander breaking up with me was the worst thing that could happen. Turns out it was the best thing. It forced me to become someone who didn't need saving. You never needed saving, Daniel said. You just needed a reason to save yourself. The contracts were signed the following week. North Tech moved into the Brickell property and, against the odds, secured the defense contract. The company stabilized, though it would never reach its former heights. Alexander kept his word about the employee fund and the donations. He sent Maya a formal thank you note, which she filed away without reading. She'd meant what she said. She was done giving him space in her life. Torres Creative continued to grow. Within 2 years, they expanded to New York and Los Angeles. Maya hired a CEO to handle daily operations so she could focus on strategy and mentorship. She started a program for women entrepreneurs, especially those from modest backgrounds, teaching them everything Richard had taught her. She and Daniel got engaged on a quiet beach in the Keys. No fanfare, no spectacle, just two people choosing each other. The wedding was small and perfect, surrounded by the people who'd stood by her through everything. And sometimes when Maya gave talks to aspiring entrepreneurs, someone would ask about the gala, about Alexander, about revenge. And Maya would smile and say, the best revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming so completely, authentically yourself that the person who hurt you becomes irrelevant. It's building something so beautiful that you forget why you wanted revenge in the first place. It's choosing grace not because they deserve it, but because you do. Because here's what Maya Torres learned. Empires built on revenge crumble just like empires built on arrogance. But empires built on resilience, authenticity, and genuine purpose, those last forever. She'd started as a girl who thought she needed a billionaire to complete her story. She'd ended as a woman who wrote her own ending, and it was better than any fairy tale could ever be. So now I want to hear from you. If you were in Maya's position, what would you have done? Would you have helped Alexander or let him fall? Have you ever had to choose between revenge and grace? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I genuinely want to know your take on this. And if this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that you're capable of rebuilding yourself no matter how broken you feel, hit that subscribe button, because we're building community here of people who believe in second chances, personal growth, and the power of choosing who you become. Your story isn't over. Sometimes it's just beginning. Thanks for listening to Maya's journey with me today. Now go write your own.